Hello there and welcome to this week's archaeological video presented by me, Atlas. And what we're looking at today is sub-disciplines that you find in archaeology. Archaeology is not only is its discipline in itself, it has so many different subforms and other little schools of thoughts, departments, disciplines inside of this academic field. And that's what we're going to explore today. And the first one is looking at archaeological science. So archaeological science is kind of a field, but not really a field, but kind of is. And it essentially revolves around the idea of using scientific investigative techniques or experiments, programs, machines, etc. on archaeological material. And we have three different dating fields that sometimes you can come into which apply to dating of archaeological science, which is radiocarbon dating, which is looking at carbon dates from the half-life and that. And if you've seen my last week's video, I kind of explained a little bit briefly on that. Then we've got thermoluminescence, which is on inorganic materials. So this is looking at like stones, metals, etc., and trying to get the dating wise from that. Then we have dendrochronology, which uses tree rings to determine the date of, let's say, mostly the date of an archaeological site. Then we have more materialistic archaeological science. So we have archaeometeorology, which is about looking at metal objects. So this could be through microscopic analysis, XRF machines, determining what materials, elements are in this metal or this artifact, sometimes the provenance of where this is from, and linking back to sometimes the chaîne à patois, like what kind of processes might have gone in. But we have geophysics, which is used in landscape archaeology, which is about, in a sense, sending scans into the earth to determine what's underneath as you're rolling over this machine. And the last one is lithic analysis, which is different types of analysis that you can do on stone artifacts. And then the next one we have is forensic archaeology and Osteoarchaeology. So essentially these two, they do differ in a sense, but they're essentially the same thing as they both look at the study of bones. So we have forensic anthropologists, often used by scientists to help determine age, death, sex, growth and development in human remains. So they're specifically looking at human bones to determine those kind of things. And sometimes it can be used in police work, but mostly this is osteology, where it's just looking at, when it comes to a deposits of graves, determining how old people are to get statistical analysis of, like, saying this burial is, for instance, full of females between the age of 15 to 20, but there's no males, and this could add up to some questions. And osteology, which is looking more into this kind of study of bones rather than in the ancient period, not really modern era, it's osteology, which comes from osteo, which is bone, and legos, which is knowledge. And it's, as I said, it's the looking at anatomy and looking at the structure, what the bones are, and all that lot. And then you have zooarchaeology, which is essentially the same as osteology, but looking at animal remains rather than humans. Next we have is environmental archaeology. So this is looking at the long-term relationship between humans and their environments. And we have two main subdivisions. We have archaeobotany, which looks at the plants that are around the environment, and looks at what plants have been used, what's been dating, what has emerged, and kind of looking into the development of agriculture from this. While landscape archaeology is looking at the material remains or the structures or evidence that humans have done by shaping the landscape around them. So by doing this, they essentially look at the overall region. So some archaeology is looking at just the settlement, just the grave, while landscape archaeology is about the regional picture, the big picture. So we have a settlement here next to a grave site here, and the next settlement's not this far away. What we can see is a road that links between the two, and what kind of questions answer from that. And then we have conservation archaeology, which is kind of a subfield, but not really a subfield. But it's all about the conservation of archaeological remains. So this is in museums, in private collections, or actually on site. And you have three main responsibilities for that. As you said, on-site conservation, research on materials of the past. So not only are you conserving these objects, but you're also doing bits of other testing and other questions on these materials, not only keeping them intact, but trying to answer other questions that could be questions, and maybe if there's a new technique, analysis out there, you can kind of question it. And the last one is kind of education outreach. So this is to bringing together the perspective and priorities of both conservators and archaeologists. So these two are trying to talk as well as giving outreach to the public about how these artifacts are kept, how they're dug up, and what we're doing to try and keep the history alive. Then we have Ethnoarchaeology, which is the study of past, focusing on the material remains rather than culture. So sometimes known as anthropological archaeology, and it's essentially it's just looking at how people lived in their past through the social structures and religious beliefs from the objects that we see, and as well as living in like social groups. So they're trying to link, say, tribal lifestyle of Papua New Guinea to kind of go back to the Neolithic, Neolithic kind of lifestyle, and trying to bring modern examples back to the ancient and see what links we can and if these make sense or does it work. Then we have experimental archaeology, which is essentially experimenting with archaeological remains. So this is not only just reproduction, it's reproducing, it's all the thing about trying to relive the object's life. So like, say if you found a sword, you want to know as an archaeologist, how is it made, how was it used. In experimental archaeology, you recreate this object, so you get all the materials together, then you make the object through the same similar circumstances. And then not only could you see its aesthetic value, you could see, I've made it this way or not. And what you could learn is, if I do it different ways, what outcome does it come? And do we see this in the archaeological record? And the other one is reenacting. So you can reenact the socialness of it, what impacts it, like the manual of labour, but not only what actions you could do with the sword, what the social values after making, and all that lot. So experimental archaeology is quite useful in that sense to answer some questions by doing reenactments or recreations or reproducing archaeological data. And then we have industrial archaeology, which is more looking at modern archaeology, or in this case it's specifically during the Industrial Revolution, so looking at the 1800s to the 17th century. And it's not only just looking at architecture, the emergence of technology and the physical remains of the industrial process, but also how this links into the written records about people, social standing, etc. And then we have battlefield archaeology, which is looking at, as the name suggests, looking at battlefields. So it's more... this is on maritime archaeology. I've got my pages the wrong way around. So maritime and coastal archaeology is looking at water in a sense. So what material remains of human actions are under the water or seas, or how humans have impacted the waters around them. So you could be looking at shipwrecks, harbours, sunken settlements, but also how the coast is being changed through fortifications or flood defences, sea defences, all that lot. And that kind of links into maritime and coastal archaeology. Then we come on to battlefield archaeology, which is looking at battlefields as a whole. So mostly they deal with World War I and World War II sites. So they're dealing with very sensitive matters because these still have impacts or ideas still left in people about the horrors of the war, their family members, and it's still ingrained in people today. So they're dealing with very sensitive materials. And they also rely on topographical studies, also, with historical data, as well as excavations to look at how battles came about. So you can have it written down, but with the archaeological evidence, you could back up how, say, the Battle of Somme was found and what we can see that's been left behind. And then the last one is this cognitive archaeology. So this is looking at the ideologies and belief systems of previous civilizations. So through their religious structure, art and practices in the material culture. And one of these links into archaeoastronomy, which is looking about the more spiritualistic or phenomenological approaches. So as you're an archaeologist, you're in the Stonehenge. What would you see if you were back then? What would this tell you? How does the architecture strike in with the use of light or the impressiveness on this mount, as well as looking at, say, this art piece seems to be sitting here. So what does this message say? So you're trying to answer these kind of questions of religion, questions of like our place in society, our place in the world, but looking it through their kind of eyes. So it's more of a opinionative approach rather than scientific. And that's really it for this week. It was only supposed to be a short video kind of explaining what is happening, what are the different subdisciplines you can find in archaeology. And I thank you for listening through it with this very brief one compared to the others. And the next week I'll try and go into a bit more detail about archaeological typology. It's one of the topics I'm talking about in my research master thesis. So it will be an expansion on that and trying to talk it through while I'm writing the beginning of my thesis. So enjoy your day. Hopefully it's sunny, and see you next time.